As the relentless heatwave continues here in the UK, we're here to chill your bones. It's episode 28 of Partners in Crime.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
Hello, Bob.
Good day to you, sir.
Oh, that's very formal.
Well, little formality in life, I think, is a good thing occasionally.
I was watching a little series called Sick Note this week. I watched Series 1 and Series 2, and yes, I saw your shank.
Yes, well, I do apologise in advance for that.
You shouldn't wear such tight trousers on TV.
Listen, for once, I'm almost speechless.
Well, we're about 10 seconds into the show, and I've already managed to headbutt the microphone, and someone's mobile phone has buzzed. So,
well, this is the effect my shank can have on people.
The level of professionalism
gone to pieces in front of my very eyes.
It's a good job we don't edit this, isn't it? Otherwise, we could have just got rid of all that and started again. But
well, I'm glad you saw it.
Yes,
as you say, no change there, no acting involved from my part. Just a sort of me in real life, really.
Yes,
with a samurai sword.
Trying to kill Rupert Grint.
Yes,
very interesting.
Yes, so you don't get many fans for attempting that sort of thing. But yeah, so well, it seems to have gone down very well.
Yeah,
nothing to do with me, I have to say,
and nothing to do with crime either. But very, very funny.
Yeah. It's black humour. It really is,
yeah.
Isn't it? And it seems to be going down very well. It's on Sky at the moment, and I think I know it's going out on Netflix worldwide from September.
Cool.
So you can try and avoid it, but it's getting a little more difficult to do so.
Yes. Talking of Netflix, what I used to do before my son was born is I used to get my exercise bike out, perhaps once a day, once every couple of days, put it in front of the TV, and I'd watch a program on Netflix, try and get an hour's exercise in a day, and that was my way of doing it, by and be able to watch things at the same time. Anyway, that changed when my son was born. He's now all over the living room, and I just can't. I've got absolutely no space to do anything whatsoever.
I've noticed.
My exercise bike has been sitting for the last 18 months in my spare room.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I've got no chance to get it out, and nobody else goes in the spare room, so I cleared everything else out, put the exercise bike in the middle, plonked a TV on the wall, and I've been managing to get in there for an hour each day to do some exercise and watch some Netflix, which means I can now contribute to the What I've Been Watching This Week segment.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's very. So that is that penny farthing that you've got in the middle of your sitting room.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yes, I see.
Yes, it's attached to my electricity meter as well. One for a bargain. That's me. I've been watching a series called Glitch, which is kind of crimey in a way. I mean, one of the characters is a police officer. It's set in Australia in a small town and called Urana, and this police officer gets called to the graveyard in the middle of the night one night, and 6 people have climbed out of their graves. At which point it starts to sound very kind of fantasy, supernatural, but it isn't, and that's the weird thing. It's I don't know if it's going to end in a supernatural way. I'm only a few episodes in, but there's been no inclination that there's any kind of supernatural thing. They're not zombies. They are massively confused, but they are the people before they died. They've not come back as the undead. They are actually alive again, and they are the people. And some of them have been dead for 150 years, and they're now coming to grips with planes and the internet and TV and what have you.
God, this sounds vaguely familiar to me.
It's a couple of years old.
There was a French series, 2 series of a French. I forgot what it was called now. Listeners will probably know exactly what it was. Set in a French town where people started coming back from the dead. It was set by a big reservoir, I seem to recall. But anyway, this sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's called Glitch. It's an Australian series, and it is it's kind of. It's thrillery, I suppose. So I thought it would apply here, and I thought
it's a great conceit, isn't it? These, sort of people coming back from different generations. And
I'm not quite sure what the link is or why they all came back at that one time.
And I suppose when they do actually climb out of their graves, there's no real sign that they've been actually there for. No. They are as when they officially, supposedly shook off their mortal coil.
Yes, prior to death. Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Yes, back prior to death.
One of the rejected names for this
Glitch.
podcast.
Well, that sounds absolutely... Well, it does sound fascinating,
Yeah,
and I
it's
think...
great.
and I'll definitely look out for it. What network is it on?
It's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix.
It's probably available elsewhere as well, but I couldn't be bothered to look.
Have you noticed that? I say network now. It's always what channel in the UK. And I still say it. If I knew something was on the BBC or ITV, I'd say, oh, well, it's on... What channel is it on? But
We're trying to appeal to our Atlantic audience.
Yes. What channel? What network? What platform?
Platform.
Is it on? It's platform 3 at Paddington Station, leaving at 12:04.
I've been on trains all day. I don't want to hear that. Carry on.
Right. Well, here we are. Here's my recommendation for the week, and I'm very excited about it. It's an author I hadn't heard of before, and I now absolutely adore. Her name's Sabine Durant. People will be going, he's cottoned on at last, has he? So I read Lie With Me, which I think was a runner-up in Theakston's Crime Festival. I think it was last year. What a book. I'll tell you what it's about, really. I've got some blurb here. It starts with a lie, the kind we've all told to a former acquaintance we can't quite place, but still, for some reason, feel the need to impress. The story of our life embellished for the benefit of the happily married lawyer with the kids and the lovely home. And the next thing you know, you're having dinner at their house and accepting an invitation to join them on holiday, swept up in their perfect life, the kind you always dreamed of, which turns out to be less than perfect. But by the time you're trapped and sweating in the relentless Greek sun, burning to escape the tension all around you, by the time you start to realise that, however painful the truth might be, it's the lies that cause the real damage. Well, by then, it could be just too late.
Wow. Did you do the audiobook?
No, I didn't. I would have loved to have done that. Well, this is an extraordinary book. It really is. I recommend it. It sort of reads itself, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It just took off, and I was through it before I knew it, and I really couldn't put it down. I'm not. I stand not alone in this. A sizzling tale of deceit, betrayal, and entrapment that is extraordinarily well crafted and utterly gripping. A stunning summer read, the Daily Mail says. What does the Guardian says? Enormous fun, psychological thriller worthy of Ruth Rendell or Patricia Highsmith. Wow. Ingenious plotting, fine characterisation, and assured pacing, the Sunday Times. It really is great. So Sabine Durant, I recommend it. It's a fantastic book. It's a psychological thriller.
Lie With Me, it's called.
It's called Lie With Me, and I'm halfway through another one of her books, Take Me In. A hot beach, a young family on holiday, a fatal moment of inattention. Well, that got me, and I'm amazed I'm here. I should be at home reading it now because it's that good. But as is the book of our guest this week, we'll be talking about shortly a very different style of writing, a very different story, but one that had me hooked just as much. So that is Lie With Me by Sabine Durant. Get it on Kobo now.
Yes, so you can do that by heading to kobo.com, find Lie With Me by Sabine Durant, and if you enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, then as a listener to Partners in Crime, you can get an exclusive 90% off of that purchase if it's your first ebook purchase from Kobo. Now, someone's books who you might not want to buy is a chap here called Liu Yongbiao, I believe.
Can you say that again, please? Liu, hard of hearing.
Liu Yongbiao.
Yes.
I've very likely said that wrong, but that's how it's spelt, at least in the anglicised version. He's a 53-year-old writer from China. He's one of the most acclaimed authors in China, apparently, and this has been reported all over the place, from the Guardian to the Telegraph, and I'm reading it here from a site called Social News Daily. It says, it turns out some of what he wrote was not fiction at all and was based on actual events that he himself perpetrated. What? In particular, the murder stories in his books, which he admitted was inspired by a multiple murder he committed himself.
Now, don't you start getting any ideas.
Well, he's one of China's most acclaimed authors, apparently, and he's been sentenced to death on Monday. It was a cold case that was unsolved for nearly 25 years.
One of the most acclaimed crime writers, and now one of the most acclaimed killers.
Yeah, it's just an extraordinary story. It's the kind of thing that you would see in a film or a book, but it's actually come true. And here, the words that he told officers when he was arrested at his home in China's Anhui province was, "I've been waiting for you all this time."
Well, that's chilling in itself.
It's an absolutely remarkable story. So I thought that one should get some mention on here.
Well, yes, it is. I mean, yes, I'll be looking over my shoulder next time I go to a crime festival in China.
Well, yeah.
Not that I've ever been invited to
Hopefully
one. I don't know whether one exists. But anyway, my goodness me. Well, an example not to be taken.
No, indeed, yeah.
But
we've got some great guests coming up on the show in the coming weeks. Stephen Booth is on next week.
Lovely Stephen Booth,
talking about his new book. And also we're going to be speaking in a few weeks' time to Val McDermott, which I'm mentioning now because I've seen a thing in the news here which we should congratulate her about. She's been appointed as visiting professor at the University of Otago in New Zealand, which is a place that we've discussed a few times on this show now.
Yes, we have.
She's the visiting professor of Scottish Studies and Crime Fiction. She's been appointed there. So she's going to spend up to 8 weeks a year in Dunedin. And
where does she find the time? She's the most extraordinary person.
Yeah.
You know, if you follow her on social media, I mean, she's, you know, it's wonderful because everything she puts on there is extraordinary. And we've discussed her singing talents with her band of fellow crime writers and musicians in the past, and all that, and writing the most extraordinary books.
Well, she's been very kind in liking and retweeting us as well. So. A friend of the show, Val.
Thanks, Val.
And many congratulations to her on that position. We look forward to speaking with her in a few weeks. But, so this week's guest, a very exciting one for me. With the next kind of 4 or 5 guests we've got lined up, including today's.
Roll of drums.
Yeah, are extraordinary. Well, it all started last week, actually, with Brian McGilloway. A favourite of mine. And we've got a real run of superb guests.
Kate Rhodes is coming up too, lover of Kate Rhodes' books. I'm absolutely one of them, set in the Scilly Isles. She's one of our guests shortly. So
we've got some absolute crackers coming up. And this is one of them. Simon Toyne is the author of the Sanctus trilogy and the blockbusting Solomon Creed series. His first book, Sanctus, became the biggest-selling debut thriller of 2011 in the UK, and his books have been published in over 50 countries. His 2015 hit Solomon Creed was an instant Sunday Times bestseller and has since been followed up with The Boy Who Saw and Broken Promise. Simon, welcome to Partners in Crime.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute...
It's nice to be a partner.
Well, yes, partner number 3 this week. Solomon Creed. It was my book of the year a couple of years back. I absolutely loved it. Thought it was absolutely fantastic. Solomon Creed is not a character that I can easily explain. I doubt many would be able to. So I'm giving that job to you.
You're going to make me explain it, aren't you? Well, first, thank you very much for making it your book of the year. That's very nice. It's always particularly gratifying when readers like it, particularly really distinguished readers like yourself, who's a fellow peer, excellent novelist. So no, that's good. He was. I mean, maybe to talk about who he is, it's probably interesting on this kind of podcast to talk about where he came from. And really, he was a reaction to, I mean, I love all of those thriller heroes, the sort of lone man walking into town. But there's loads of them. They're all, Jack Reacher-esque. And they all have a very distinct backstory. They all have skills. They always have a past. They're ex-services or ex-military. So they have a skill set upon which they can draw, which is great. And, part of the fun is seeing them draw upon that. And I thought, what could I do different? Because I like it, but I didn't want to sort of add to that. And, as a reader, I'm always looking for something that's different, that's kind of moves something in a slightly different direction. And it occurred to me that what would be really interesting and subsequently really hard to do would be to have a character who has no idea about his past, who is the stranger who walks into town, but knows nothing about himself. So he has no core, he has no skill set upon which he can draw. He's not ex-military, he's not anything, he doesn't know who he is. And actually the whole, a sort of sub narrative running through each book is him trying to find out who he is, is him trying to go to these places, asking questions, as you would, if you're trying to find out about yourself, you ask questions. So he ends up going to these I liked the sort of architecture of having each book being this guy going somewhere where he knows nothing, having to ask difficult questions in order to find out who he is, and thereby putting himself in harm's way. Because as a sort of a premise for a thriller series, it just seemed like a really good thing for me to do as a writer, but also something I hadn't read before. So basically, Simon, he starts in the first book in Solomon Creed, walking down a road in Arizona. And he has no idea, with a burning plane behind him, he has no idea how he got there, who he is, whether he was even on this plane. And he walks towards this town shimmering in the heat haze in the distance called Redemption. And as he sees the name of the town, he has this kind of blinding memory, this flood of memory. And all he knows is that he's there to save this man called James Coronado. And he figures that if he can find this man and figure out why he has to save him, then all will become clear as to who he is and whatever. If he knows he's got to save this man, then this man surely, by extension, must know who he is. So the police and the fire service all scream towards him because it's tinder dry and there's a burning plane and they're trying to stop a wildfire. And the police car screeches up next to him, and Solomon says, "Do you know who James Coronado is?" And the police chief says, "Yes, we buried him this morning." So thereby starts the first book of, and the tagline was, "How do you save a man who's already dead?" And the only reason he knows he's called Solomon Creed is because he's wearing this tailor-made jacket. Fitting so well made, fitting like skin, and inside there's a label saying this suit was made in French. Ce costume est fait pour trésor pour Monsieur Solomon Creed. This suit was made to treasure for Mr. Solomon Creed. So that's the only reason he knows his name. So the entire first book is he's trying to find out who James Coronado is and why he died in this little town that really doesn't want him to find this out. And it's close to the Mexican border, so there's drug cartels involved and everything. It's modern. It's like a modern Western, really. Although I never said the word Western when I was pitching it to my publisher, because obviously Western, people don't read Westerns, apparently. I love Westerns.
It is a modern take on one, isn't it? It's got that. It's so atmospheric of where it is, and it's...
set in Arizona desert and all that, And the thing is, I went and I knew Arizona a bit, but I went out and did a research trip and wandered around. I wandered around trying to find a place I could set it, and in the end, I couldn't find anywhere. This place, Redemption, I couldn't find a place that was exactly right for the needs of the story. So I ended up kind of cobbling together this place out of various places I visited, sort of like the outskirts of Tucson, Tombstone, a little place called Bisbee, which is a sort of a kind of mining place, which is with a defunct mine right near the border, and it was, I kind of drew on all these. I'm like a magpie. I took all the best bits of these and made this agglomeration of places and called it Redemption, so that I could, I set up the very particular backstory of it.
Great name as well, Redemption. It's just everything in the book is just so evocative. Something I wanted to ask you, Simon. Solomon Creed, as you say, he is really the mystery of the book, and there are many mysteries in the book. But when you wrote the book, did you know Solomon Creed's background? Were you exploring it with us, or have you kind of known all along what's going on there?
I know who he is, yeah. So before I even wrote it or even figured out the plot of the first book, I knew who he was. And so the original idea for Solomon was, and the one-line idea that I had in the middle of writing my second book, was what if there's a character who's on a journey to find out who he is, and he has to... And the journey is framed by the 10 Commandments. He's obviously done something terrible in his past. And so each book, so book 1 is Commandment 1. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, and so on. And so everything, the moral dilemma at the center of each book, whatever it is, all modern books, but each one is he almost has to learn the lesson of that commandment. He has to figure out what is going on in this book that is wrong, and so consequently he sort of traces all the way through. And so that was the original architecture. And it was like, the idea is there's 10 book series, each one loosely framed by one of the requirements of one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, etc. And the final book, once he's effectively kind of learnt all these lessons, he finally finds out who he is. Now that's a hard sell to a publisher, going 10 books, really, where we don't find out this guy. So the first book started off on that route, And ultimately, you've got to find out who he is. So it's got to have a big thing of like, who is he, or even what is he, as I kind of phrase it as well. And so it changed a bit. So, I mean, if you've read the second book, Boy Who Saw, you can see it kind of moves away from that slightly. I mean, it's still there, I think, in the DNA of it, but it's not so express as, this is Commandment 2, this is Commandment 3, whatever. And really, with all series, you've just got to, they've got to grow organically. I think if you sit down and go, right, this is the series, this is how it's going to work, and I know exactly what's going to happen in each one, then you're just, as a writer, you're just colouring in for years. You're just joining the dots, and the readers it'll be slightly disengaging, and I think the reader feels that too. You've got to be on that journey with him as a writer, and so even though that was the initial premise, by the time I wrote the first book and got to the end, and he'd been through all these things, he'd changed as a character. I discovered things out about him and through the process of writing it and thinking about how he would react to certain situations. And so the second book is it's more traditional of a thriller. I think it's kind of less other. The first one, he's really other because it's a very ethereal place. It's this sort of almost biblical thing of him walking out of the desert to this town, which was kind of built on copper and God, and so it kind of plays very much in those themes. But the second book is more of a sort of, it's more of a kind of a story about the kind of recent history of European right-wing nationalism, which doesn't sound again like the best pitch for a thriller, but there's lots of exciting things happening with neo-Nazis and stuff and chasing across France. So there you go. And as a writer, as well, you've written series characters and you've written standalones. Each one, you've got to be engaged as a writer in order to invest the book with soul. So I knew who he was. Long answer to your question, but I wasn't entirely sure the journey towards finding out who he was.
Well, I must say, Simon, it's Bob here. Hi, how are you? All right.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very, very well indeed. Now, your first book was the literary highlight of my recent holiday. I have to say, it was also one of the biggest frustrations because I read it in just over a day. Couldn't put it down. It's one of the most vivid. I mean, it's just terrific. Any of our listeners listening, it is a fantastic read. The big frustration was I was stuck in a place without any Wi-Fi and couldn't get anywhere, so I couldn't get The Boy Who Saw or Broken Promise. I've corrected that now. It really is just the most extraordinary read, and as you've so eloquently said, you've created a central hero, a protagonist now, which is, I think, quite unique and fascinating, and you're drawn to immediately. And the conceit of him actually finding out about himself is splendid, and I haven't seen that before. I mean, the opening, walking away from this crash in the Arizona desert towards this town called Redemption, and there's a funeral going on the hill, and the fire from the airplane is spreading and moving ever so slowly towards the town. I mean, you're quite right. It's Old Testament time in many respects, but I can't praise it enough. I think it was absolutely splendid. So thanks for my holiday read.
Well, you've praised it enough. Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I wanted it to be a sort of modern epic, modern biblical epic with all of those, sort of the idea of the town feeling it's cursed for various reasons because, there's dark things going on inevitably. On the surface, it all looks lovely and like a kind of chocolate box Americana town. But inevitably, it's built on dark foundations and the power, it's sins of the fathers and all those sort of things coming to the front. So I wanted it to have, I wanted it to feel like one of those epic Sergio Leone westerns, like, Once Upon a Time in the West or something, but have a modern setting with kind of modern architecture, so there's this cartel thing going on, which is kind of modern evil, it's the modern equivalent of the cattle baron or the railroad barons who are coming in and destroying everything and with no, just all about commerce and no regard for life or tradition or all this kind of stuff. So, but I say it's a Western, but it's sort of it also fits in that tradition of all of these, which they all do. All of these loner walking into town do. There's culturally you find them in all over the world. Whether it's the Ronin in samurai narratives or the knight errant in kind of medieval literature. Of the kind of warrior without a master who's trying to find his identity. And it's biblical as well. The notion of the prophet, the sort of misunderstood person who comes out of the desert with wisdom and is shunned and stoned, and yet there is something noble and divine almost in his kind of task. So yeah, I wanted all of that. I wanted all of that with guns. That's what I want. Is that too much to ask? No, I don't think it is. As a reader, I'm there. So yeah.
Well, you blend the modern stories and the contemporary atmosphere with the biblical kind of influences so well. But that's not the first time you've done that. You're not new to that kind of blend of history and the modern day. Your Sanctus trilogy it went pretty much down those roads as well, didn't it?
It did. I mean, it was weird. It's really interesting. When you set out to write a book, you're just trying to write a good story, and it's only really when it then gets turned into a product to be sold. And clearly marked, they have to market it in a very specific way that you almost sort of learn how other people perceive it. And very much the Sanctus trilogy was marketed as a sort of Dan Brown-esque, twisty-turny, pseudo, sort of history of religion, sort of obscure, arcane history thriller, modern thriller, which I can get that. I mean, I didn't set out to write a Dan Brown book. I just had this idea, and I thought, oh, that's the best idea I've got when I started to try and write a book. And so that was very much marketed like that. Whereas Solomon Creed has very much been marketed more in the line of the Lee Child Reacher, man walks into town and knocks head together kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting. So I just feel they're the same. I feel I write, I mean, there's a lot of similarities. I always write third person. There's always multiple perspectives, very short scenes. But I trained really initially as a screenwriter. So I think I write more like sort of movies in book form, very short intercut scenes, and the structure is as important, and part of the plot and the tension as the characters and all the plot and everything else is. So I just think they're all sort of, each book I think is just the best book I've got in me at that time. There's no real, I don't know, I'm going to write a Dan Brown book, and what else is, Lee Child's selling well, I'll do one of those. There's none of that. It's just like, it really is, I'm the first reader, and I think a lot of writers do this. People are always having ideas, that whole, the question we always get as writers or creators is, where do you get your ideas from? And I always say it's the wrong question, because ideas are 10 a penny. I mean, you get ideas all the time. You get ideas in the shower, in the supermarket, walking the dog. You just get ideas all the time. The key is to pick the good ones from, the rubbish ones or the generic ones. Is to be alive and alert to those ones. Like with Solomon, of like, I haven't read that character before. I'd quite like to read that character. And so as a first reader, I'm looking for a book that I haven't seen. And inevitably, I always rue it when I'm about 100 pages in, going, how am I going? I don't know how to do this, because there aren't that many books you can go through.
No blueprint.
No, I mean, you can steal, but everyone, we're all magpies and we steal and try and steal from the best. But it's, you don't steal wholesale. You just look at how someone does action or something and go, oh yeah, I can see what he's doing there and do that. And so yeah, with all of this, I'm just. So the Sanctus ones, I see that they've been marketed differently, but I think they're just part. I think if you read those and read this, you could see it's the same author. I think because the pace is similar, and I have my voice, such as it is consistent. I think through those books.
Well, this is why I'm so in awe of you, Simon, is because you don't write to market, but you still keep hitting the zeitgeist, and the things that you put out there are relevant at the time, are needed at the time, and do extraordinarily well. And without having, I mean, as you know, I'm the kind of person who has their eye on the market very much at the time, and is kind of aware of what does well and what needs to go out when.
And it works very well for you too. So there you go.
Well, yeah, but I have to go out and do that. I don't have the same natural talent that you do for almost kind of either hitting the zeitgeist every time or creating the zeitgeist at that time. I'm not quite sure which it is yet, but I'm watching in awe either way.
But you must. I'm interested. So, like, if you're looking for trends in the, more actively looking for trends in the market and stuff, which I do to a degree as well. I'm a commercial writer, and I've got to keep food on the table and all that sort of stuff. But there must be some point where you go, right, I can see where the market's going, and of the ideas I've got, I think that is the one that suits the market.
Yes,
but if you at that point, say if there's another idea that you really like and feel more, that might be more of a Hail Mary, but I can see how it could fit with the market trends, or maybe even advance, sort of be slightly ahead of the market trends. Which one would you go for? Would you go would you go with head or heart, I suppose, is the question I'm asking.
I would count the bills in my in tray first. Have a look at which one needs
always
writing.
A very sobering kind of grounding device.
But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not averse to writing a personal project. I mean, I'll write plays as well, and they sell not very much at all, but I very much enjoy doing them. It's as you said, it's usually a case of thinking, okay, here's a whole bunch of ideas I've got, which is going to be best to write now, not just which is going to sell best, because you don't, by the time you've written it, the trends could have changed. You're talking months down the line. But also which appeals to me, which one's going to make me want to get up in the morning and get out of bed and write the next scene. There are various different things that go into that decision for me. But yeah, the market it's got to be one of them, because, like you say, you've got a family to feed.
Oh, yeah, no, I've got some ideas that no way on earth would I write, just even though I'd like to write them, and I think they'd be good, just because they are so far and away from where the market is that I just know I just don't want to sit in front of that meeting with sales and marketing at HarperCollins going, go on, try and sell this to Tesco's. And they're like, but it's about a mammoth. And I'm like, yeah, no, but it's an allegory. And they're like, you know what I mean? It's like,
well, mammoths could be huge this time next year. We've had vampires, we've done that.
Exactly. Come on, you heard it here first. Mammoth's the new big thing. Hey. So I suppose I do have I mean, the thing is, before I was a full-time writer, I worked in TV for 20 years, and I made commercial television. So I think I have an innate sense of audience and market. And, so by commercial TV, I'm making the primetime stuff that's supposed to appeal to the broadest demographic and is hooky enough to stop you from turning over when the adverts come on, so all of which is really good training, and I use all of those tools still. But it's not so conscious, I don't think, with the writing of it. I think
it works so well, though. And I can totally see that in the writing, without a doubt. I was gripped. I read Solomon Creed. I think it took me 2 days. I'm a slower reader than Bob.
Coach.
But and that's why I love reading your books. I mean, Peter James is another person who writes in that kind of style. Each chapter is a scene. He's got some chapters that are 4 lines long. And he had a background. I think he was he directed or produced films, I think.
Yes, he came from the film world, didn't he? Yes, and obviously, I mean, was that a big decision for you, Simon, to actually leave the world of screenwriting and television and move into novels, or did it just organically grow out of the other? I mean.
It was, well, I always liked writing, even before I went into TV, and so the written word was something I really always liked, and I've read a lot and wrote a lot, and my career in TV was a lot of writing, writing proposals and scripts and various things. And I think it really was. It was a small midlife crisis. So I was approaching my 40th birthday and having a little assessment of where I was. And I was doing really well. I was head of development for a really big independent production company, which meant I was, coming up. I was creative. I was coming up with the new shows. But, TV is very reductive and very... there are lots of similarities with publishing. I think publishing is a lot more genteel and cordial,
yes,
and less brutal. Yes, as you've had experience of all that, it's sort of, and so consequently, and I was making programs that I was kind of making programs that I'd made before, and I was thinking, do I just want to make endless iterations of something that I've already done, And as a restless creative type, I was. And also writing for TV is very prescribed. Writing for TV, as you know, with scripts and with stage plays is writing teleplays or screenplays is dialogue and structure, really. It's dialogue and structure. And of course, all the character and everything comes through that, but you never have to describe anything because the production designer will come up with stuff and they'll find a location and they'll point a camera at it and you can see it. You know, you can give a hint, but you don't really have to set mood by description and all of those things. And I missed all that, you know, having read loads of things and, you know, very widely from kind of poetry all the way to nonfiction and everything in between. I kind of wanted to do those. And after years of TV where it was just structure and dialogue, which are great and essential parts, you know, I kind of wanted to do that, and also I was a kind of slightly comfortable job, you know, where I was staff in TV, which is very hard to come by, and I just felt a bit too comfortable, and I could say it was a very brave decision to leave telly, but it wasn't really, because even though I was staff, I knew that if I left for 6 months and came back, it's not like the corporate world where there's a corporate world abhors a vacuum. And if you leave your job, someone's in there and you can never get back at the same level. I knew I could freelance and do exactly the same job. And so it was a calculated risk. And I just thought I need to get this idea of writing a book out of my system one way or another. And that meant either writing something truly terrible and going, I can't do this, but at least I've tried, or writing something that was, you know, had something in it that, and I genuinely thought my first book, I would sort of write it and maybe get an agent, and then they would give me advice, and my second book might get some interest, and the third book might get published. That was genuinely my idea, my sort of 5-year plan. And I knew I could work freelance doing odd TV jobs in between to, you know, keep food on the table. So that was the plan. But the first book turned out to be Sanctus, which was this massive hit. So there you go. So it was.
Well,
I'm
looking at your 6 book covers here, right in front of me. And every single one of them says the Sunday Times bestseller. I think that says all.
It does. It does indeed. I mean, and I find this absolutely fascinating, Simon. I mean, you know, and you write these extraordinary books. Would you consider yourself a lead child writer in your approach, chapter 1 and let's go, or are you a James Elroy man? You sort of plan out everything very carefully and follow a sort of a plan in your approach to chapter or whatever. I mean, how do you approach books, or is it different on every book?
I'm sort of more like, I'm like a Lee Elroy, so I'm a bit of both. So I normally have an idea of the end, and I normally have an idea of the world and the structure, and then I'll figure out who is the best person. I normally have a reveal, a sort of twist or some big point of the destination, and I figure out who is the best person to, or actually, you know, because the job of a thriller writer really is to create a really nice character who people root for, and then make life extraordinary and give them something to do, and something they need to achieve, and then make it extraordinarily hard for them to achieve it. That's pretty much it. You know, I'm staring at one of the many post-its on my wall now, which is just there as a sort of thing when I stray from the screen, and it says simply intention and obstacle. That's it. That is all you need to do. Just sorry, I need to get there. Oh, but there's something in my way. That's it. That's storytelling. And so I always have that intention. I always kind of know where it's going. So like in Solomon Creed, I knew who he was, and I knew really part of the big mystery of that was to make it very hard for him to discover who he is. That's simply, you know, put, that is his story. That's the arc of the whole series. But the obstacle part is where I'm more Lee Child. You know, I will, you know, sort of know in an Elroy way, here's my man or my woman in the Sanctus trilogy case. Here's where they need to achieve, and here's where they start. Then I normally sort of have an idea of the opening scene or scenes, and I sort of know where I get to, which normally takes me to about 30,000 words or 100 pages. And at that point, I feel like I'm, you know, when you see these kind of half-built roads across valleys that are under construction, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of one of those, and I can see the other side of the valley. I can see the other end of the road, and there's this mass chasm between me, and I'm like, now I need to build my way to that. And that's where I often go slightly off-piste and sort of and mix metaphors, as I am now, and write a messy first draft to get me between those points, which I then go back and go through. So no, I'm not like, because Lee Child, you know, says he starts on page 1, perfects page 1, gets to page 2, and so on. And by the time he gets to the end, there is no first draft; it's the only draft. I mean, I don't really buy that, I have to say. I think
if I did that, then by the time I got to the end, I'd be 60.
Wow. Yeah, but I think it's like, you know, it's like, you know, do you do a messy first draft and then do a thorough second draft and do all that figuring it out as you go along? Because it's still a redrafting process, isn't it? Or do you figure out each one and move on and whatever? I mean, there are lots of writers do that. Don't move on until that page is perfect and everything.
Do you know what? You do what it takes to get the book done.
Well, it doesn't matter. No one reads the book because they go, well, I understand. They had a really detailed outline on this book.
Yeah.
I'm totally
the fact that we have to ask every writer this, and that readers always ask us, means that the reader doesn't know whether you've planned it or whether you've just run with it and then you've edited afterwards. I mean, as long as the book gets done and the book is great, the kind of how it's put together. I mean, you don't go out to a restaurant and have a great curry and go, oh yeah, I like the way he stirred in the cumin. I can see he did that in a clockwise direction rather than anti-clockwise one.
Unless you want to be a cook, in which case you really want to know which direction.
Exactly.
You're looking at the wrong thing, because that does not tell you how to be a good cook. No. I saw Michael Connolly a few years back at Thriller Fest in New York talking, and he said about he was answering this exact question about writing and plotting and stuff, and he said it kind of doesn't matter. He said really the job of the author is to do all the heavy lifting and to make everything and to work really hard so that the reader can just enjoy the ride and not think about any of the things that are supporting him through. And I thought, oh, that's actually right, isn't it? Yeah. It doesn't matter. All of this stuff doesn't matter. I mean, it matters if you want to do it. If you want to write, then it matters hugely. And I remember when I was writing Sanctus, I was obsessively going on websites and stuff and trying to find authors' web pages, trying to find out their method of doing thing. And of course, all it did is make me really confused because everyone does it differently.
Yeah. Well, yeah, get the book done and let the reader forget that they're reading. That's the that's what I tend to stick to anyway.
And obviously, with the book, you don't have to worry about the cliffhanger going into the commercial break. Although that's a chapter to chapter, I suppose. You still that's the structural devices to actually keep the reader hooked, which is again you did for me. I have to say I agree. Your covers are brilliant too. They are fantastic, and I've got Sanctus, which I'm going to get stuck into. I think as soon as I finish this. So Simon, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Taking the time out. I mean, that's been a wonderful explanation of your writing, and I know lots of our readers will be hitting the Kobo button now if they haven't already done so to get your books. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we can have another chat maybe later on in the year when your next one's coming out.
Absolutely, that would be great.
What is the next book? Have you got a working title for the next one? Can you divulge anything? Well,
I'm writing Solomon 3 at the moment, but I'm also writing a standalone, which I've had the idea for a while, and in that way, I've I'll do that when I have some time, as if you ever have enough time to just write a book. And my publishers, HarperCollins, who very, very generously and nicely allowed me to take a slight hiatus from Solomon, although I did the novella, Broken Promises, a novella, which I published earlier this year, which sort of bridges the gap between Solomon Creed and The Boy Who Saw. So it's a little interstitial book of what happens on the road. So even though it came out third, you should read it second.
Good. Right,
so there you go. And it's only 100 pages, so it's a quick read.
That's even quicker.
So Robert, you'll read it in 5 minutes.
I'll have it done before breakfast.
Right. Absolutely. And so I'm taking so I did that as a sort of another Solomon story, but I'm writing this other one it has got a working title, but it changes every day. Almost every day I go to it, I change the title as the first thing, and it's a standalone, and it's set in the UK, and it's more of a sort of what is it? Well, it's a mystery, really. It's more of a it's not even a police procedural. It's sort of my take on a police procedural, let's put it that way, in that it kind of is. The architecture of it looks like one, but it isn't actually about that at all.
Can't wait to read that.
Oh my gosh.
That does sound like my kind of thing.
And that'll be next year. I mean, really, the premise of that is a body is found in this pristine location, and they are surrounded by objects, none of which should be there. And as they start investigating them, it starts telling the story not only of the crime, but also of the person killed.
Wow.
Wow, well, that's whet my appetite.
You know how to do it, Simon. I'll say that much.
Well, again, thanks, and I hope we haven't intruded on your break, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And as I say, I'm with your books for the next month.
Great.
So
next 5 days, the way you read.
Anyway, I hope you have a lovely summer and it's not too hot.
Back to the swimming pool, I think.
Yes.
No, I'll stay in the shade where I belong with my pasty skin. It's fine. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Yes, I hope we should talk another time. Have another chat.
Absolutely, let's do it. Well, he's a great guest, Simon, isn't he?
Well, yeah, he's a fantastic guest. He's a fantastic writer, and he knows my wife.
Yes.
There's a treble whammy.
Yeah. Small world, isn't it?
Again, overwhelmed by the eloquence of Simon. I mean, he certainly does know of what he speaks, and to actually write such contrasting styles of books, and for them all to be runaway bestsellers is a huge achievement, and all power to him, and to his assured future success. But it was a fascinating interview, and I, for one, learned an awful lot from it.
I mean, insanely jealous as well, because he was speaking to us from his other house in France.
Yes.
And he'll by now be making his way back to the swimming pool. Which is as I sit here in this mini studio in my house, which is soundproofed and is therefore airtight in this heat wave. Not massively pleasant.
You have got a water feature in the back garden. It's not quite a swim.
Can't go swimming in it. I can sit on it.
You could sit on it and get a wet bottom.
Like a cheap bidet.
That's about as cooling as it would be. But I mean, it looks very pleasant. But yes, I mean, I must admit that idyllic French existence. Sort of writing through the day and having a swim and an early evening.
I think they're having a swig. Because when we talk about being in France, I just think of red wine. A swig and a swim.
Meandering down to a local restaurant in the evening. Oh, gosh, let me just stay there for a few seconds.
Should we have a holiday?
Just got back for one.
I know. Anyway, we've got work to do.
You've lost me completely. I'm sorry. I'm off in a Provence idyll.
Yeah.
Many listeners will probably say, "I wish he'd stay there," but there we are. So that was 28. That's our 28th episode.
It is.
I mean,
yeah, we're
in a few seconds.
Yeah, we're more than. Have we got a limit or something? I got to.
No,
it's like live radio. I've just got to keep waffling now until we get to the end of the show, and then very, very quickly talk about it, and then end it.
The beautiful thing. Do you have any public announcements to make regarding Kobo before a special office? Have you done that already?
Do you know what? I think I do. Very well remembered.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, this is our 28th. I should be able to remember something, even at my age.
Well, if you like the sound of Simon Toyne's books, and why wouldn't you? I'm telling you now, they're very, very good. So head over to kobo.com, and if it's your first ebook purchase from Kobo, enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and they'll give you 90% off.
No whistle, nothing, just entire respect for Kobo for offering us such a marvellous discount on these wonderful books.
Indeed. And talking to wonderful books, next week we'll be speaking to Stephen Booth about his new book Fall Down Dead, which is the 18th Cooper and Fry novel, and I'm very, very excited about that because it was Stephen's books actually that inspired me to write my first crime novel. So it's basically his fault that I'm here now doing this podcast in a strange roundabout way.
Well, it takes quite a lot to silence me, but that's pretty much done it. Stephen, I think, he's one of the great crime writers.
It's his fault, you know me
in
as
the
well.
UK. It is his fault. He's got a hell of a lot to answer for, hasn't he?
He has. We'd better grill him next week, hadn't we, and see what he's got to say for himself about all this.
So basically, I mean, we could waffle on.
We could.
Or we could just stop.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.